In the midst of the 12th century, particularly around 1176, northern Italy stood as a vibrant mosaic of prosperous city-states, each pulsing with commercial activity and civic pride. This region, nestled between the Alps and the Apennine Mountains, harbored powerful urban centers like Milan, Verona, Brescia, and Bologna, which had grown from medieval towns into sophisticated political and economic powerhouses. The landscape was dotted with fortified cities, each surrounded by fertile agricultural lands and connected by an intricate network of trade routes. Milan, the beating heart of Lombardy, had emerged as the most influential of these cities, its wealth derived from craft guilds, international trade, and advanced manufacturing, particularly in weaponry and textiles. During this period, these Italian communes found themselves in an increasingly tense relationship with the Holy Roman Empire, led by Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa. The emperor, seeking to reassert traditional imperial rights and authority over northern Italy, viewed these increasingly autonomous cities as a direct challenge to imperial power. Barbarossa's vision of empire clashed fundamentally with the city's growing sense of independence and self-governance. The political landscape was characterized by a complex web of alliances and rivalries. Each city-state had developed its own unique system of self-government, with elected consuls and city councils representing the interests of wealthy merchants and noble families. These cities had grown accustomed to managing their own affairs, collecting taxes, minting coins, and administering justice, privileges that Barbarossa sought to curtail. The geopolitical atmosphere of the time witnessed an unprecedented phenomenon: the rise of urban autonomy. Cities that had once been mere administrative centers were now asserting themselves as independent political entities. This transformation represented a direct challenge to the traditional feudal order, where power flowed from emperor to nobles to common people. Instead, these cities were creating a new political model based on collective governance and civic participation. The region's strategic position between the Holy Roman Empire and Rome added another layer of complexity to this political chess game. The cities often found themselves caught between imperial ambitions from the north and papal interests from the south, forcing them to navigate carefully through these competing powers while maintaining their independence. This period marked a crucial moment in European history, as the emerging urban civilization of northern Italy began to challenge the traditional structures of medieval power. The city's determination to preserve their autonomy would soon lead them to an unprecedented act of collective resistance: the formation of the Lombard League. Like and subscribe to Medieval Chronicles for more fascinating historical content. At the heart of this medieval drama stood the leadership of Milan, the powerful city that would become the driving force behind the Lombard League. The Milanese consuls, elected by the city's governing council, demonstrated remarkable diplomatic skill in uniting traditionally rival cities under a common cause. Among these leaders was Piemonte de Vimercate, whose eloquent speeches and strategic mind helped forge crucial alliances. The city's Archbishop Galdanus also played a vital role, using his religious authority to legitimize the resistance against imperial power. Frederick I Barbarossa emerges as one of history's most compelling figures. Known as Red Beard due to his distinctive facial hair, he ascended to the imperial throne in 1155. A charismatic and determined ruler, Barbarossa embodied the medieval ideal of kingship. His vision of restoring the glory of Charlemagne's empire drove him to conduct 6 major military campaigns into Italy. Despite his fearsome reputation, Barbarossa was also a skilled diplomat who understood the art of negotiation. His personality combined military prowess with political acumen, making him a formidable adversary for the Italian cities. The imperial forces under Barbarossa's command consisted of German knights and their retinues, supported by allied Italian nobles who remained loyal to the empire. Christian of Mainz, the emperor's chancellor, proved particularly effective in implementing imperial policies in Italy. These forces represented not just military might, but the old feudal order that sought to maintain control over the increasingly independent Italian communes. Among the supporting cast, several figures stand out prominently. Alberto de Gisano, though partially shrouded in legend, became a symbol of Milanese resistance, allegedly leading the Company of Death at the Battle of Legnano. The consuls of allied cities like Bertram of Verona and Gerard of Bologna worked tirelessly to maintain the coalition's unity. Merchants like Rodolfo de Concarezzo of Milan used their extensive trade networks to gather intelligence about imperial movements and to ensure supplies reached League forces. The papal presence, represented by Pope Alexander III, provided crucial moral and political support to the League. Though operating from behind the scenes, his diplomatic maneuvering helped legitimize the city's resistance against imperial authority. Local nobles who sided with the League, such as the Marquis of Bizzo Malaspina, provided military expertise and territorial support that proved invaluable to the coalition's success. Within each city, guild masters and wealthy merchants formed the backbone of support for the resistance. These civic leaders understood that their economic prosperity depended on maintaining independence from imperial control. They used their resources to fund the League's military efforts and their commercial networks to strengthen intercity cooperation. Women also played significant roles, though often unrecorded in traditional histories. Noble women like Beatrice of Burgundy, Barbarossa's empress, sometimes acted as mediators in diplomatic negotiations. Within the cities, merchants' wives managed family businesses while their husbands served in city councils or fought in battles. Together, these characters, from the highest nobles to the wealthy merchants and civic leaders, created a complex web of relationships that would determine the fate of northern Italy. Their actions, ambitions, and decisions would shape not just the outcome of the conflict, but the future of Italian city-states for centuries to come. At its core, the story of the Lombard League represents one of history's most compelling struggles for freedom and self-determination. The fundamental theme revolves around the passionate desire of Italian cities to govern themselves, free from the heavy hand of imperial control. This wasn't merely a political dispute. It represented a clash between two vastly different visions of how society should be organized. The cities of northern Italy had developed a unique way of life centered around urban liberty. Their citizens had grown accustomed to making their own laws, electing their own leaders, and managing their own affairs. They had created sophisticated systems of self-governance where merchants, craftsmen, and nobles participated in civic life through councils and assemblies. This urban autonomy stood in sharp contrast to the feudal system that dominated most of medieval Europe. The central conflict erupted when Frederick Barbarossa attempted to reimpose imperial authority over these increasingly independent cities. The emperor claimed ancient rights derived from Charlemagne's time, demanding not only monetary tribute, but also the power to appoint local officials and control city policies. For the proud Italian communes, this was an intolerable attempt to turn back the clock on their hard-won freedoms. What makes this struggle particularly fascinating is how it gave birth to one of medieval Europe's first examples of collective resistance. The cities, traditionally rivals who often fought among themselves, realized they needed to unite to survive. This unity wasn't easy to achieve. It required overcoming centuries of local rivalries and suspicions. Yet the threat of imperial domination proved greater than their differences, leading to an unprecedented alliance. The emerging civic identity that developed during this period would have lasting consequences for European history. Citizens began to see themselves not just as inhabitants of their individual cities, but as defenders of a new way of life. This civic consciousness manifested in various ways, from the construction of impressive public buildings to the creation of civic symbols and ceremonies that celebrated urban independence. The conflict also had a profound economic dimension. The city's prosperity depended on their ability to control their own commercial policies, maintain their own currencies, and manage their own trade relationships. Imperial control threatened to disrupt the complex economic networks that had made northern Italy one of Europe's most prosperous regions. The resistance wasn't just military, it took many forms. Cities engaged in sophisticated diplomatic maneuvering, formed economic alliances, and used their wealth to build impressive fortifications. They also developed innovative military techniques, including the use of citizen militias alongside professional soldiers, challenging the traditional dominance of noble cavalry. Perhaps most significantly, this struggle represented a crucial moment in the development of political thought. The cities began articulating new ideas about legitimate authority, collective rights, and the relationship between rulers and ruled. They argued that political power should flow up from the community rather than down from an emperor, a revolutionary concept for its time. The conflict also fostered a new kind of patriotism, different from both feudal loyalty and modern nationalism. Citizens developed deep attachments to their urban communities and the freedoms they represented. This civic patriotism inspired art, architecture, and literature that celebrated urban values and achievements. Through their resistance, these cities demonstrated that alternative forms of political organization were possible in medieval Europe. Their struggle wasn't just about maintaining independence. It was about defending a different vision of society, one based on urban liberty, civic participation, and collective self-governance. Life in the northern Italian cities during the time of the Lombard League pulsed with remarkable dynamism and complexity. The urban centers had evolved sophisticated republican systems of governance that set them apart from the feudal structures dominating the rest of medieval Europe. Within these cities, power rested not with hereditary nobles alone, but with an intricate web of social classes and institutions. The heart of these urban republics beat in their communal assemblies, where elected officials, known as consuls, managed city affairs. These consuls, typically serving short terms, came increasingly from both noble and wealthy merchant families. The city councils met in impressive civic buildings, often centered around a main square or piazza, which served as both administrative centers and symbols of republican pride. The merchant class emerged as a transformative force in this period. Their rising wealth, derived from international trade and banking, translated directly into political influence. These merchants lived in towering family houses, often fortified, that dotted the urban landscape. They invested their wealth not only in trade, but also in civic improvements, funding the construction of churches, bridges, and public buildings that enhanced their city's prestige and functionality. The economic vitality of these cities rested upon sophisticated networks of trade and finance. Merchants from Milan traded fine textiles with Venice, which in turn connected them to Byzantine and Islamic markets. Bologna's legal experts provided services throughout Europe, while Verona's strategic position controlled crucial Alpine trade routes. These economic connections created a web of mutual interests that strengthened the city's ability to resist imperial control. Trade and craft guilds formed the backbone of urban economic and social life. These organizations, known as arti or corporazioni, regulated production quality, trained apprentices, and protected their members' interests. The guilds also played a crucial role in city defense, with each organization responsible for maintaining a section of the city walls and providing armed men during conflicts. During the struggle against Barbarossa, these guild-based military units proved invaluable, combining their professional skills with civic duty. Daily life in these cities hummed with activity. Markets filled the squares, while workshops clustered in specialized districts, metalworkers in one area, textile workers in another, creating a landscape of productive expertise. The sounds of hammers, looms, and trading voices filled the narrow streets. Religious processions and civic ceremonies regularly brought together all social classes, reinforcing community bonds and urban identity. The city's wealth enabled a remarkable degree of social mobility. Successful artisans could rise to master status, their children might become merchants, and merchants' families could eventually join the ranks of the civic nobility. This social fluidity, though limited by modern standards, distinguished these urban republics from the rigid hierarchies of feudal society. Education and literacy flourished, particularly among the merchant class who needed these skills for business. Cities established schools, and some, like Bologna, developed universities that attracted students from across Europe. This intellectual environment fostered sophisticated legal and political thinking that helped cities articulate and defend their rights against imperial claims. Women, particularly from merchant and artisan families, often played active roles in family businesses and craft production. While excluded from formal political positions, they influenced civic life through their economic activities and social networks. Widows could inherit and manage businesses, and some achieved significant economic independence. The resistance against imperial power drew strength from this complex social fabric. When Barbarossa threatened urban autonomy, he faced not just military opposition, but the resistance of an entire social system. Merchants could disrupt supply lines, guilds could mobilize armed forces, and the city's wealth could fund prolonged resistance. The social and economic independence of these urban communities proved as important as their military strength in their successful defense of autonomy. This vibrant urban society, with its republican institutions, economic networks, and social mobility, represented a revolutionary alternative to feudal organization. The success of the Lombard League in resisting imperial power demonstrated the strength and resilience of these urban communities, whose social structure would influence European urban development for centuries to come. The formation of the Lombard League in 1167 marked a watershed moment in medieval European history. In the spring of that year, representatives from Cremona, Mantua, Bergamo, and Brescia gathered in the monastery of Pontida, laying the groundwork for what would become one of the most powerful alliances of the Middle Ages. This initial meeting, shrouded in secrecy, was prompted by the devastating destruction of Milan by Frederick Barbarossa's forces in 1162. The cities recognized that only through unity could they hope to resist imperial dominance. Within months, the alliance grew to include Venice, Verona, Vicenza, Padua, and several other northern Italian communes. Milan, rebuilt and reinvigorated, joined the coalition, bringing its considerable resources and strategic importance to the League. The alliance members swore solemn oaths to defend each other's independence and resist imperial demands that exceeded traditional rights. They established a common treasury, coordinated military forces, and created a sophisticated system of mutual support. The League's early years witnessed a careful balance of diplomatic and military preparations. Cities fortified their walls, trained citizen militias, and stockpiled supplies. They also engaged in diplomatic outreach, securing support from Pope Alexander III, who saw the League as a useful counterweight to imperial power. The alliance's strength grew as more cities joined, creating a formidable network of resistance stretching across northern Italy. The Battle of Legnano in 1176 stands as the most dramatic and decisive confrontation between the League and imperial forces. On a warm May morning, Barbarossa's army, predominantly composed of heavy German cavalry, advanced toward Milan. The League's forces, led by the Milanese contingent, took up defensive positions near the town of Legnano. At the heart of their army stood the Carroccio, a sacred wagon bearing Milan's standard and serving as both a religious symbol and a military rally point. The battle began with imperial cavalry charging the League's lines. Initially, the German knights broke through the first ranks of Italian infantry. However, the tide turned when the League's own cavalry, including the legendary Company of Death, counterattacked with devastating effect. The fighting grew increasingly fierce around the Carroccio, where League infantry formed an impenetrable shield wall. The crucial moment came when Barbarossa himself was unhorsed and disappeared from sight, leading his troops to believe him dead. This triggered a collapse in imperial morale. The German forces retreated in disorder, pursued by League cavalry. The victory was complete. Barbarossa barely escaped with his life, reaching Pavia days later with only a handful of followers. Legnano's significance extended beyond the military triumph. It demonstrated that well-organized urban militias, combining infantry and cavalry, could defeat the empire's feudal armies. The victory strengthened the League's political position and forced Barbarossa to recognize that he could not impose his will through force alone. The Peace of Constance in 1183 represented the culmination of the League's struggle. This remarkable document, negotiated over several months, effectively recognized the autonomy of the League's cities while maintaining a nominal imperial overlordship. The agreement detailed specific rights granted to the communes, including the authority to elect their own officials, maintain their own armies, and manage their internal affairs. The peace established a careful balance between imperial authority and urban autonomy. Cities would continue to acknowledge the emperor as their theoretical overlord and pay certain traditional tributes. However, they secured their essential freedoms, the right to build fortifications, exercise criminal and civil jurisdiction, and maintain their own customs. Importantly, the agreement recognized the League itself as a legitimate entity, ensuring the cities could continue their collective organization. The document also established procedures for resolving future disputes between the empire and the communes, creating a framework for peaceful coexistence. It specified the emperor's rights during his visits to Italy and set limits on imperial taxation. This legal framework would influence Italian political relationships for centuries. These three pivotal events, the League's formation, the Battle of Legnano, and the Peace of Constance, transformed the political landscape of medieval Europe. They demonstrated the power of urban cooperation, the effectiveness of combined military forces, and the possibility of limiting imperial authority through organized resistance and negotiation. The success of the Lombard League provided a model for future collective action and contributed to the development of more complex political relationships between rulers and ruled. The League's achievements resonated beyond their immediate time and place. They showed that determined cities could successfully resist imperial power, that urban military organizations could defeat feudal armies, and that negotiated settlements could establish workable balances between competing authorities. These lessons would influence political development throughout Europe, contributing to the gradual evolution of more complex and nuanced political structures. The era of the Lombard League witnessed a remarkable flowering of cultural and intellectual life that would profoundly influence European civilization. The emerging civic consciousness in northern Italian cities created a new way of thinking about community, politics, and human relationships that distinguished itself from the feudal mindset dominating medieval Europe. Within the bustling streets of cities like Milan, Bologna, and Verona, a new form of civic identity took root. Citizens began to see themselves not merely as subjects of a distant emperor, but as active participants in their community's destiny. This consciousness manifested in various cultural expressions, from the construction of magnificent civic buildings to the creation of elaborate ceremonies celebrating urban independence. City chronicles, written in both Latin and vernacular languages, recorded local histories and celebrated civic achievements, helping to forge a distinct urban identity. The development of civic consciousness found physical expression in urban architecture. Cities constructed impressive town halls, or broletti, which served as visible symbols of communal authority and civic pride. These buildings, often featuring grand meeting halls and elaborate decorations, represented the marriage of practical governance with cultural expression. Public spaces, particularly the central piazza, became stages for civic ritual and community gatherings, where citizens of all classes could participate in the life of their city. The period saw the emergence of sophisticated diplomatic practices that would influence international relations for centuries to come. Cities developed complex systems of ambassadors and representatives who maintained permanent missions in other communes. These diplomats required new skills. They needed to be versed not only in Latin and law, but also in the art of negotiation and the subtleties of intercity politics. The documentary culture that emerged from these diplomatic exchanges created templates for modern international relations. The art of negotiation reached new levels of sophistication during this period. Cities employed professional notaries and legal experts who developed standardized formats for treaties, agreements, and diplomatic correspondence. The University of Bologna, already famous for its law school, played a crucial role in developing the intellectual framework for these diplomatic innovations. Scholars there synthesized Roman law with contemporary practice, creating new legal concepts to address the complex relationships between cities, empire, and papacy. Urban technological innovations transformed both civilian life and military capability. Cities developed advanced systems of water management, including sophisticated networks of canals for irrigation and power generation. Milan's engineers became particularly renowned for their expertise in hydraulic engineering, creating systems that both protected the city and enhanced its economic productivity. In military technology, the cities of the League made significant advances. They developed new techniques for constructing and defending walls, created innovative siege engines, and perfected methods of urban defense. The organization of citizen militias required new systems of training and command, leading to innovations in military structure and strategy. The famous Carroccio, a mobile standard-bearing wagon that served as both religious symbol and military command center, represented a unique fusion of technological and organizational innovation. The intellectual life of these cities fostered remarkable advances in record-keeping and administration. New systems of commercial bookkeeping emerged, along with sophisticated methods of tracking citizenship, tax obligations, and military service. The need to coordinate activities between League members spurred the development of standardized forms of communication and record-keeping that would influence bureaucratic practice throughout Europe. Education underwent significant transformation during this period. Cities established schools to train future merchants and administrators, while universities like Bologna attracted scholars from across Europe. The intellectual environment in these urban centers encouraged practical innovation alongside theoretical learning. The combination of commercial necessity and intellectual curiosity led to advances in mathematics, engineering, and practical sciences. The cultural life of the cities expressed itself through various artistic forms. Religious art began to incorporate civic themes, while secular art celebrated urban achievements and values. Public architecture combined practical functionality with aesthetic excellence, creating spaces that served both civic needs and cultural expression. The development of vernacular literature, including poetry and chronicles, helped articulate and spread civic values. Perhaps most significantly, this period saw the emergence of a new understanding of community and governance. The experience of successful resistance against imperial power, combined with the practical necessities of urban administration, led to sophisticated theories about the nature of legitimate authority and the relationship between rulers and ruled. These ideas, developed in law schools and city councils, would influence political thought for centuries to come. The guilds played a crucial role in this cultural and intellectual ferment. Beyond their economic functions, they served as centers of technical innovation and knowledge transmission. Guild regulations helped standardize technical practices while also encouraging innovation within established frameworks. The guild system created networks of skilled craftsmen who could share knowledge and techniques across city boundaries. This rich cultural and intellectual environment created lasting legacies. The combination of practical innovation, sophisticated diplomatic practice, and emerging civic consciousness produced new ways of thinking about community, authority, and human potential. The cultural achievements of the League era would influence European urban development well into the modern period, establishing patterns of civic life and cultural expression that remain relevant today. The period demonstrated how political independence could foster cultural and intellectual creativity, and how practical necessities could drive innovation in multiple spheres. The cultural and intellectual elements that emerged during this time helped create a distinct urban civilization that would shape European development for centuries to come. The story of the Lombard League's external interactions reveals a complex web of relationships that extended far beyond the immediate conflict with the empire. These interactions shaped not only the League's success, but also the broader development of medieval European politics and commerce. Papal politics played a crucial role in the League's fortunes. Pope Alexander III, locked in his own struggle with Frederick Barbarossa over church authority, recognized in the League a powerful ally against imperial ambitions. The papacy provided crucial moral and political legitimacy to the League's resistance, effectively transforming what might have been seen as mere rebellion into a righteous struggle for liberty. This papal support manifested through diplomatic channels, with papal legates actively working to strengthen the League's coalition and mediate disputes between member cities. The relationship between the League and the papacy was not simply one of convenience. It reflected deeper theological and political theories about the proper relationship between secular and religious authority. Papal documents of the period increasingly emphasized the concept of libertas ecclesiae, freedom of the church, which paralleled the city's own claims to self-governance. This ideological framework helped justify resistance to imperial authority while maintaining respect for traditional hierarchies. Mediterranean trade networks proved vital to the League's success and sustainability. Venice, though sometimes an ambivalent ally, provided crucial access to maritime trade routes that connected the League's cities to markets in the Byzantine Empire, North Africa, and the Levant. These trade connections ensured a steady flow of luxury goods, raw materials, and military supplies that strengthened the League's economic position and its ability to resist imperial pressure. The cities developed sophisticated commercial practices to manage these international trade relationships. They established merchant colonies in distant ports, created complex financial instruments to facilitate long-distance trade, and developed legal frameworks to resolve commercial disputes across cultural and political boundaries. Venetian and Genoese merchants often acted as intermediaries, connecting League cities to even more distant markets in the Black Sea region and beyond. Trade relationships extended inland as well. The League cities maintained vital commercial links with French and German markets, particularly through the Champagne fairs. These northern connections required careful diplomatic balancing, as cities needed to maintain trade relationships with regions nominally loyal to the empire while resisting imperial political control. This commercial diplomacy often involved complex arrangements where political and economic relationships were carefully separated. The League's diplomatic maneuvering between cities and imperial power demonstrated remarkable sophistication. Cities maintained networks of ambassadors and informants across Europe, gathering intelligence about imperial intentions and building alliances with potential supporters. They developed new diplomatic protocols and documentation practices that helped standardize international relations. The League's chancelleries produced detailed records of negotiations, treaties, and agreements that set precedents for future diplomatic practice. These diplomatic efforts extended to potential allies within the empire itself. League representatives worked to cultivate relationships with German princes, who might be persuaded to moderate imperial policy toward Italy. They also maintained contact with other urban centers throughout Europe, particularly in France and Germany, creating networks of mutual support and information exchange. The League cities became adept at playing different powers against each other. When dealing with the empire, they might emphasize their traditional loyalty while asserting their ancient rights. When negotiating with the papacy, they stressed their role in defending church independence. In discussions with other cities, they emphasized common commercial interests and the shared benefits of resistance to external control. Cultural exchange accompanied these political and economic relationships. League cities became centers where different traditions and innovations merged. Arabic mathematical knowledge filtered through commercial connections, Byzantine artistic influences arrived via Venice, and French architectural innovations were adapted to Italian urban settings. This cultural cosmopolitanism enhanced the city's prestige and contributed to their growing sophistication. The League's external interactions also influenced military developments. Cities hired mercenary troops from various regions, incorporating different military traditions into their forces. They studied and adapted Byzantine defensive techniques, Islamic military engineering, and Norman cavalry tactics. This military cosmopolitanism contributed to their eventual success against imperial forces. Maritime relationships played a special role in the League's external interactions. Control of ports and sea lanes became crucial diplomatic bargaining chips. Cities like Venice and Genoa used their naval power to protect League interests while pursuing their own ambitious agendas. Maritime law developed during this period would influence international legal practice for centuries. The League's management of external relationships created lasting diplomatic innovations. Cities developed systems for maintaining permanent ambassadors, creating detailed diplomatic reports, and conducting multiple negotiations simultaneously. These practices, initially developed for practical necessity, would influence the development of modern diplomatic practice. Financial relationships formed another crucial aspect of external interactions. League cities developed sophisticated banking systems that facilitated international trade and political payments. These financial networks helped fund resistance to imperial power while creating enduring commercial relationships that transcended political boundaries. The success of the League in managing these complex external relationships demonstrated the emerging sophistication of urban political and commercial organization. Their ability to balance competing interests, maintain complex alliance systems, and manage international trade relationships while resisting imperial control marked a new level of political and diplomatic development in medieval Europe. These external interactions left lasting legacies in diplomatic practice, commercial organization, and political theory. The League's experience showed how cities could maintain independence while participating in broader international systems, a lesson that would influence European political development for centuries to come. Throughout the corridors of history, few developments have left such an indelible mark on European civilization as the rise of Italian city-states. In the shadows of ancient Roman ruins, these urban centers birthed a revolutionary concept of civic governance that would forever alter the landscape of political thought. The impact on Italian city-state development was profound and far-reaching. Venice, Florence, and Milan emerged as beacons of innovation, where merchant families wielded unprecedented economic power. Within their walls, a unique blend of commerce, culture, and civic pride flourished. Banking houses established novel financial instruments, while guilds perfected their crafts to unprecedented levels of excellence. The Medici of Florence, the Visconti of Milan, and the merchant princes of Venice created systems of governance that would influence European administration for centuries to come. The precedent for collective resistance established during this era proved revolutionary. When citizens united against external threats, whether from ambitious nobles or foreign powers, they demonstrated the effectiveness of collective action. The formation of leagues and alliances between city-states showcased how smaller political entities could maintain their independence through strategic cooperation. This model of resistance would inspire future generations facing similar challenges to their autonomy. The long-term consequences for European political structures were nothing short of transformative. The Italian city-states introduced concepts that would become fundamental to modern democracy: civic participation, checks on power, and the importance of economic freedom. Their innovative approaches to diplomacy, including the establishment of permanent embassies and sophisticated intelligence networks, laid the groundwork for modern international relations. Perhaps most significantly, these city-states demonstrated that prosperity could flourish outside traditional feudal structures. Their success challenged the medieval order, proving that urban centers could become powers in their own right, independent of royal or imperial authority. This revelation would eventually contribute to the erosion of feudalism and the emergence of nation-states. The Renaissance, which bloomed within these city-states, was not merely an artistic movement, but a complete transformation of how Europeans viewed themselves and their relationship to power. The concept of civic humanism, born in these urban republics, would influence political thought well into the modern era. Today, as we gaze upon the magnificent palaces, churches, and civic buildings that still grace these former city-states, we are reminded of their lasting legacy. Their story is not merely one of political innovation, but of human potential unleashed through the power of collective organization and civic pride. In closing, the Italian city-states stand as testament to humanity's capacity for self-governance and innovation. Their legacy lives on in modern democratic institutions, diplomatic practices, and the very concept of civic engagement that shapes our world today. This has been Medieval Chronicles. Remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating journeys through medieval history.